Can everyone hear me, just to make sure I'm standing in the right place? Great. I didn't come to Switzerland to write a book. I came to Switzerland to eat more chocolate. And luckily, writing a book was a happy byproduct. I've been here 8 years. I didn't speak German when I arrived. And now apparently my German is charming, which means that I make mistakes and nobody seems to mind. I think they appreciate that I'm making the effort to learn what is quite a difficult language, especially here in Switzerland, where the German they speak every day is not the German you necessarily learn in school or the German you read in a book. And I initially went to school, learned German, and luckily got a job in the local bookshop here. And as a result of that, I realized that the book a lot of people were asking for didn't exist. So I decided to use my experience as a travel writer to write the book that I wanted to read about Switzerland. And I was very lucky that I went to the Geneva Writers' Conference, which is an English language writers' conference every 2 years in Geneva. And in a workshop there, I had the idea of what the book could be and wrote the first paragraph. And luckily, that paragraph survives in the book. Today, it has been edited, obviously, but it survives in pretty much the form I wrote it now 4 years ago. The first book was published in 2010 and is now in German and is coming in French. And I didn't translate the book into German. My German isn't that good, otherwise no one would want to read it. But I did help the translators because some of the humour, as you probably guessed, doesn't translate so well from English to German, as the Germans are so famous for their sense of humour. Today is a talk of two halves because we have 2 hours. So the first half I want to talk about this made-up word, Swissness. It's a word the Swiss made up, essentially sounds English but isn't. And it's a word they made up to describe how they feel about themselves and about their country, about their nationality. You can pretty much guess what it means, but I'd quite like to go into a bit of detail as to what it means to me living here or to an expat living here, especially an English-speaking expat. Then we'll have a chance for questions, then we'll have a break, but I don't think there'll be any popcorn on sale. And then we'll look at the Swiss political system, because I know you have a political talk tomorrow, I think. And so I'll just give you a brief overview of what makes Switzerland very, very different from any other country in terms of politics, and try and make it so that you can understand what Swiss politics is about. But first we'll start with Swissness. And I think the easiest way is to go through letter by letter. So I'll start with the first S. S is for shells, which might sound a bit strange given that Switzerland has no coastline. It's about 400 kilometers from the nearest bit of sea. But it's a very, very special sort of shell. And I brought one along somewhere, my prop. Now you might think it's a coconut. But you're wrong. This is a Swiss person. Which doesn't mean that they're small, brown and hairy, although I think some of them probably are. What it means is there's a hard outer shell, so it's quite hard to get to know someone. It's quite hard to break through that outer shell. And it takes a long time to become friends with a Swiss person because they protect themselves with this outer shell. It's a very old analogy, it's not one I made up, it's been around for a long time. And it's an analogy to describe certain sorts of societies, and Switzerland is a very typical example, Germany is another good example, where private and public spheres are distinctly separated. And to invade someone's privacy, to go inside their coconut shell, is not appreciated. And it manifests itself in many ways. One is that you might have neighbours who are very polite, they'll say hello, but it'll take some time before they invite you into their house or even come round and say, here's a cup of sugar, like we do in England, even though no one needs cups of sugar anymore. In the workplace, for instance, it might be that you get on fine with your colleagues in the workplace, but you don't socialise outside the workplace. My boyfriend has worked 12 years in the same company, and I know almost none of his co-workers because they don't socialise outside work. And when I ask my Swiss friends about this, why, Because in England, it's fairly normal, especially on a Friday, you go to the pub after work and you get to know each other in a different environment, and so therefore maybe work better together because you know each other better. Whereas in Switzerland, it's seen as the reverse, that you're over-familiar with your work colleagues and you're blurring the distinction between private and public. And to be honest, what they want is, they've spent all week with you. The last thing they want to do is to spend the evening with you as well, and they want to go home to their friends and family. And they want to go back to their life as they see it. And so there's this very distinct difference between what is public and what is private. It can take a long time to break through the shell. It can be quite quick, especially if the Swiss person you're dealing with has lived abroad, for instance, so they're used to these strange foreigners who talk to you as if they know you, even though they don't. But once you do break through, it's sort of like going through the looking glass. It is completely different in that people invite you into their house, people use your first name, they tell you jokes. It is a different world. And that's because to be inside the shell, in Swiss terms, is to be trusted, is to be part of the inner circle. And so a friend in Switzerland is really a friend for life, not just for Facebook. It means something here. People don't call you your friend until it means something for them. And so it can feel a bit cold, unwelcoming, a bit distant. It can feel like, ooh, everyone isn't really that friendly. They're polite, but they're not that friendly. Because the opposite of the coconut is the peach. And that's very typically Anglo-Saxon cultures. The outer flesh is quite soft, so it's quite easy to get to know someone. You can meet someone at a party, you can exchange phone numbers, and you can be on first name terms, or a new neighbour moves into your block of flats, you'll invite them round. It feels to Swiss people very superficial, because they don't know you, and yet you're acting like you know them. Whereas for us, it feels like you're being friendly and open. But actually, how much does it mean? And the trouble with being a peach in the land of coconuts is that you get bruised an awful lot. Because all the time you feel these coconuts bashing at you, and actually you want a peach. So it's not, neither is right or wrong, it's difference in expectations. What to expect from strangers, what to expect from people you have daily contact with but aren't your friends. The W is for weather. This is a typical Swiss-British conversation about the weather. I'd come in from outside today and say, oh, it's cold. And the Swiss person would say, well, it's winter. And now, of course, that is an example of how small talk is here. It's tiny. Because small talk is, again, one way of invading that coconut shell. For English speakers, we use small talk to get to know someone. In uncomfortable situations, it's to break the ice. Or if you don't know someone, you have topics of anodyne nature, like the weather, or the last film you saw, or where you're going on holiday. But for a lot of Swiss people, they are totally unimportant, so they're not worth talking about. Or they're blindingly obvious, like it's cold outside. So for English people, that would start a whole half-hour conversation about, yes, but next week it's going to be t-shirt weather, and last week it was minus 30. But for Swiss people, it's winter, end of conversation. And so again, it can feel like they're not interacting, and can feel like it's hard work, it's like getting blood from a stone. But actually, for Swiss people, it's quite logical that you wait until you know someone to talk about things like that, or you talk about things that are important. And so small talk here has a very different function. I actually had to give small talk lessons to Swiss people who wanted it for work. They had to go to conferences and had icebreaker drinks parties and things, and they said, well, I just stand there and I don't know what to say. And these people ask me questions and I come up with one-word answers and there's no conversation and I feel really uncomfortable. And so we would have lessons in what to talk about this week. And it was actually hard work for both of us, because I was trying to think of topics which normally would come from both sides, and they were trying to get themselves involved in a conversation which they had no interest in having. Because as they said, why do I want to talk to someone I'll never see again about something I'm not interested in? And I said, but that's the whole point of small talk. I is for introductions. which are very important here. Partly because small talk doesn't really work, so you have to have some way of getting to know someone. When I first arrived in Switzerland, I didn't speak German, I didn't know that many people here. So when my boyfriend and I went to our first party, I knew the hosts, and a couple of people I knew by sight, maybe, because I've been visiting here for 4 or 5 years. The other 32 people in the room, I had no idea who they were. So I did what a normal Englishman would do in that situation. I went and hid in the corner and waited till I spotted someone I thought I knew well enough to go and say hello, oh, do you remember me? Or waited for the host to come and take me around. Neither happened, of course. And after not very long, my boyfriend came and dragged me out of the corner and said, why are you being so rude? You're hiding. I said, but I don't know anyone. He said, yes, exactly. So you have to go and introduce yourself to everyone who's here. And that's really what you're supposed to do. You go around, you make eye contact, you shake hands, and you exchange first names in a social situation or last names in a business situation, because it happens in business situations as well. And until you do that, you aren't supposed to have a drink or enjoy yourself or do anything until you have met everyone in the room. Now everyone knows it's very superficial. You're not going to sit or stand and have a long conversation with each person, because you know and they know that you have to get around the whole room. And if you are the only foreigner in the room with a strange name, it is a struggle. 19 times you repeat it's Diccon with a short I, like Charles Dickens without the S. And then you get someone saying Charles, because they listen to Charles Dickens without the S and just take off the S. And then you have to start again. No, actually it's not Charles, it's Diccon. And the problem is that by the time you've got through that, they know your name, but you really can't remember their name. And that creates a problem when you get to the end of the evening, because you're supposed to then go around and say goodbye to everyone, individually using their names, because you learnt them all at the beginning. And for me it's very hard. I go, oh, are you Martin? Are you Stefan? Oh no, you're quite old, you must be Hans-Uli. And of course, they remember my name, but I don't remember theirs. So I've learnt 2 tricks. First, and I'm sure this is why all Swiss people are punctual, you arrive first.
Yes.
Then you stand there with your glass. You don't have to do anything. You can have a drink. You can chat to people you know. And the people who arrive after you have to do all the work. They have to come round and introduce themselves. You just stand there and have fun and relax. When it comes to leaving, you have to get over the hurdle of trying to remember 32 names that you learned 3 hours ago in 10 minutes. And so what I do is you wait till someone else is leaving, then you follow just a couple of steps behind, and you listen to them saying, oh, I'm awfully sorry, I've forgotten your name. And you overhear the, oh, I'm Martin. And so you come, oh, goodbye, Martin, it was lovely to meet you. And they think you've remembered all the names in the room, whereas in fact you're cheating. And no one cheats in public in Switzerland, and so no one suspects you ever. But it works every time. S is for a word which doesn't exist in Switzerland, in any of the 4 national languages. Spontaneity is not in the Swiss genes.
No.
It means everything is well organized, everything runs perfectly, because everything is perfectly planned. But if you want to be spontaneous, it's hard work. When I first moved here, I didn't have a job, and in the mornings I went to school to learn German, and in the afternoons I walked around the city to try and get to know it. And because I had been visiting over the years, I knew a few people and roughly where they lived. And so I would knock on the door, or ring the bell, as I would in England. And the door would open, and there'd be this look of shock. Did we have an appointment? And I'm thinking, well, it's not a doctor's surgery, so no. I was just in the neighbourhood and I thought I'd see if you were home and have a chat. Oh, okay. And we would stand on the doorstep for 10 minutes, making uncomfortable small talk, and then I'd realise that I was never going to be invited in because I hadn't let them know in advance I was coming. And I finally got used to this idea of reversing my behaviour in London, because in London, like most places in England, if you didn't call in and they found out that you had been nearby from Facebook or whatever, or seen you at the tube station, they would be so offended. Whereas here they're kind of offended that you do call in because you haven't let them know in advance. So I got perfectly used to my Swiss friends saying, well, let's go to the cinema. And I said, okay, how about tonight or tomorrow? And I said, well, I was actually thinking April the 13th at 7:30. And you put it in your diary because you get used to it. So I've now got to the stage where I plan my spontaneity. I say to my Swiss friends, I'll send them a text or a message on Facebook and say, well, next Friday I've got the day off, and if the weather's nice, I'll probably go for a walk, and I might wander through your neighbourhood, and at about 11 o'clock, if I feel like it, I might ring on your bell, and if you're home, we could possibly have a drink. And they know that I will turn up, so they can clean the flat, because Swiss people are very house proud, and so they like everything to look nice when you arrive, and they'll have bought the drinks and bought the cookies and have everything ready for you. And I'll turn up at about 2 minutes to 11 just to feel a little bit spontaneous. And we're both happy. It works both ways. S is for Swiss francs. And living here, when you live in a country, when you come from a country which is used to paying for almost everything with plastic, it's very interesting to come to a country where money still rules everything. A lot of Swiss people use cash for everything. When I worked in the bookshop, about half our customers used cash to pay for books, even if they were buying two